Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome to What's Next from First Technology, Ryan Ramawoothar, who's the Senior Software and Cloud Specialist at First Technology. Ryan, it's great to see you. How are you doing and how's business going? I imagine that COVID's been good for business. How's COVID treated First Technology?
Morning, Aki, and thank you for having me. It's been very positive. We've been very fortunate. In one of your What's Next interviews, a gentleman mentioned that the lead salesperson this year will be COVID, and I had to have a laugh at that. And I think that was true to a large extent. But you needed to have the right skills and the right experience to be able to assist your customers. I think, Aki, during the emergence of COVID, it kind of separated companies who were geared for their staff to work from home and those who were not ready for their staff to work from home. We of course, as a leading IT company in South Africa, and we also consider ourselves a fairly progressive business, as we've been working from home for some time prior to COVID, which kind of allowed us to guide our customers in the right direction, especially those customers that were unsure of what the future looked like. There were customers that had skills gaps to be able to manage the process of implementing and maintenance. And of course, there were those customers who were not software licensing ready to have their staff work from home. And that on its own was a challenge, a big financial challenge for customers. So yeah, we have decades of experience in this area. We've seen the evolution of IT in the relevant areas to confidently guide our customers. So yes, it's been very positive for us.
Oh, that's great. It's great to hear. Now, of course, you guys were, as you were saying earlier, you've been doing this for a while. So I guess you had the blueprint to help customers get to navigate through working remotely, I guess. I mean, First Technology, you're a very interesting company. Just tell us a little bit about your company.
So, Aki, we're one of the largest privately owned IT group of companies in South Africa. We've been around since 1982, so 39 years now. We head office out of Johannesburg, and also have a presence in all the major centers in South Africa across our 9 branches, with just over, I think we're close on to 1,700 employees nationwide. The business mainly is built across IT consulting, security consulting, modern workplace. We also provide IT products, some of which we develop ourselves, others we on-sell or we resell. And then the group also consists of the largest IT distribution company in South Africa, arguably in First Distribution. And I have seen an interview where you had a First Distribution gentleman on, so it was good to see the representation from the group.
So,
So in
pretty diverse, hey, I'm hearing from you, Ryan.
yeah, yeah, I think in a nutshell, Aki, our vision for our customers at First Technology is really to empower them with the right technology across the group. The right stuff that will meet the demands of the customer, and the future demands of the industries. And then also, just lastly, to touch on this, something that we try and ensure our customers get is the promise of reliability, to ensure that they get their positive or good return on the investment. So yeah, that in summary is who we are, Aki.
Now that's awesome. I mean, what I said was, you're very, very diverse in the products that you offer and what you can do on the enterprise space. And I guess we had to talk about POPIA as well today, and I think it's going to be an interesting talk with you because this is now becoming reality, right? I mean, we're literally a few weeks away from this act being put in place. I think companies have had just over a year. Well, they've had a few years, but the president laid down the gauntlet and he said, "Listen, it's now happening." I mean, where are we at with POPIA? I'm hearing many companies are struggling. Many companies are putting a lot of effort and a lot of time and money into getting POPIA right. We know how important it is. We know the implications that it has. I mean, what kind of challenges are you finding your customers are having? How are you helping them? Where are we with POPIA?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Aki. So at First Tech, we don't claim to be legal experts on POPIA. much like our customers, but we do know and love the technology that supports the customer in the journey to compliancy. So to put it into context, customers really do need assistance in this area, and they do need assistance in identifying the most important areas to POPI compliancy. Our approach, and largely the industry as a whole to assisting customers, is to focus on three main areas. We look at the classification of data. So what is considered sensitive information, and how do we locate that information, and how do we retrieve it? We look at data governance. So how do you map a specific data asset or a sensitive piece of data to a specific business process or a specific business purpose? And then lastly, we look at protecting data, which becomes paramount at the end of the day. So how are we ensuring that data is kept inside the organization safely through things like encryption and the various security controls that are available to us? So once we define those three areas, we can actually build out processes which we can then apply to the relevant technologies that the customer either has or needs to introduce into the environment.
Okay, I mean that makes perfect sense, and I think it's very important points that you've just made. But you know, Ryan, you look at some of the customers, and I chat to some organizations. Now you've got the very big organizations like the banks, and you know the big companies that have got lots of resources. You know, they've got the legal resources, because let's be honest, I mean this POPIA is a minefield of legal information, so you got to know how to navigate it. So you know, I don't know, is it an unfair advantage that massive organizations have, that they have massive legal departments, HR departments, to help them navigate through this POPIA Act that's coming through? How do you compete against the organizations with these massive budgets? If you're a small, medium-sized business enterprise, what do you do?
Yeah, so that's a very good point, Aki. I think ultimately, big or small, you need to know what the impact of POPIA is on your specific organization,
right? So
that you can decide what the best approach is for you. Complying with POPIA is most certainly not a one-size-fits-all exercise. You know, different organizations need to take different steps to get closer to that state of compliancy. So, for example, what a small business has to do is very different from what a medium or a large-size organization would have to do. And then also, and this is very important, an organization's steps that they need to take are also dependent on the foundations that they've already built to protect personal information.
Right.
So some organizations may have many securities in place and are very well versed on the security topic, while others have very little security and are fairly new to the issue. So everybody has their own set of circumstances that they need to consider when implementing.
Sure, I don't know about you, but I'm like petrified of POPIA. To try and manage that process, it's
very daunting.
The reality is we've had a lot of time. I mean, organizations have had lots of time to plan and get all their ducks in a row. And I guess we're going to learn more about it as it unfolds. But when you look at the fines, I mean, that petrifies me. If you know, if there's a breach of any sort and you haven't got your data protected, I mean, the fines are pretty massive. And I guess, do they discriminate between, you know, if you're a big company or a small company, the size of the fine, for example? I mean, who falls into what target? You know, you've got small, large, medium enterprises, you've got government, you've got NGOs. So it's quite complex. I mean, what is the approach to take in this regard?
Absolutely correct, Aki. So from our understanding at Firstech, the Act does not have any preferential treatment per sector or per company size when it comes to the prosecution of POPIA. There are considerations for a company like ourselves who provide services when dealing with an NPO as opposed to a large enterprise business or a multinational business. So our customers at Firstech range from SME all the way through to enterprise customers, and the approach stays the same. And so does the tool set to an extent, because, you know, sensitive data remains sensitive. It's the same whether you're big or small. So there are two things that we look at, depending on the size of the company, is we look at their licensing. So there are programs out there that are suited for smaller businesses and government departments and NPOs. And in those cases, we apply for the necessary costing models to suit their needs and to suit their pockets, of course. And then secondly, the supporting frameworks provided by a service provider like First Technology in managed service agreements and SLAs, service level agreements, are then also adjusted to suit customer needs and customer size.
Okay. So, I mean, it's interesting you say that. So if I'm a small company and I have a breach, I could theoretically, as it stands, get the same fine that a big organization gets. And I guess a breach is a breach, whichever way you look at it. If you have to comply, then, you know, you've got to comply. And I think the word compliance, how many organizations are getting that term drummed into their heads over the last few months? And I guess that it's when you mention compliance, it gets people, you know, cold, and people catch a big fright when you hear the word compliance. But it's amazing how many organizations are not fully utilizing, you know, the technology that's out there to help you become compliant. And I'm talking about software. There's some great software there that helps with all of this compliance.
Absolutely. So I think what is comforting is the fact that the regulator, the information regulator, will not likely have any issue with you using software to implement the POPIA controls if the software actually helps you protect personal information and avoids the company from being non-compliant. It's actually likely that the regulator will encourage you to use data protection software, especially when you're processing large volumes of personal information. And we know that's the case in the retailer scenario and finance and insurance. And in fact, Aki, there are some examples in other countries or other jurisdictions where the data authorities actually encourage the use of what they call PETs, privacy enhancing tools, and they actually partner with vendors to be able to assist customers. So software is playing a massive role in the customer's journey to being closer to compliancy or full compliancy.
Well, I mean, you just think about, you mentioned retail now. I mean, how many places do you go into and you've got to fill in that form where you put your name, your cell phone number, your ID number, your temperature. And I'm thinking about all of that data. That's like not even compliant. The way the law stands, I mean, how you manage that data, what you do with that data is going to be very, very critical. So companies need to be very aware of even something small like this. But let's go to Microsoft. And Microsoft have got some fantastic software, and there's a compliance center, and they've really thought of that whole process. I've had a couple of workshops in terms of how their process works in becoming compliant. How does this Microsoft technology work? If you don't mind sharing that insight with us.
Absolutely. So within Microsoft, you've got the Compliance Center, and then you've got a product called Compliance Manager. And in our opinion at First Tech, the real power in Compliance Manager specifically exists in the dashboard functionality. And what that details is your current compliance level, the risk assessments needed to get closer to that state of compliancy. And all of this is built in the Compliance Center in the cloud. So what we try and do is we try and give some key benefits to customers. And for the sake of the viewers, around Compliance Manager. And I'll give you 3 key benefits. I think what we're seeing is the real-time monitoring and the assessments to strengthen your level of compliancy. We look at recommended actions, and that is also paramount. So what do you need to do to get closer to that state of compliancy? And then thirdly is the control mapping functionality within Compliance Manager. So that is effectively, how do we map very sensitive data to a business process or a business purpose? And I think this is all integrated into the Office 365 package. So to go a little bit further, I think for end users, importantly, what you want to do is reduce the dependency and the effort on the end user. So the solution is very cleverly built into the applications the users know and the users love, of course. So there are no additional add-ins for IT to deploy or to manage. And then a step further, so Microsoft's information protection stack kind of also gives you the insights through that single pane of glass, that dashboard that we speak about. And here you can create your policies and you can actually monitor what is happening in your environment. And this again is all part of the M365 or Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. And then the bedrock of the solution, Aki, for us is the flexibility and the classification capabilities, which then becomes your main mechanism for you to identify what is important data to you. And then just lastly, the data protection, well, for any data protection solution to work, it's got to be user friendly. So they've built a nice, they've built some really good flexibility into the solution that allows you to balance that level of protection, classification, and the ability to continue to be productive. You can't have your people not working.
Okay, so Ryan, from what I'm hearing from you is that although the Microsoft compliance software is an add-on, right? So if you've got your existing infrastructure, you add it on, but it goes quite deep. So if you've got people using Office 365, for example, and those kind of applications within an organization, it does cover those external applications like Office 365 remote stuff. So it really goes in quite deep, even though it's an added module.
Yes, correct. Compliance Manager. But I think natively, Compliance Center exists within Office 365 and the M365 stack.
That's right.
So maybe just to give everyone a little bit of context around this question. So we mustn't forget, in order to help your organization effectively protect personal data and sensitive content relevant to your company, you need to implement a solution and processes that allows you to discover, classify, protect, and effectively have the ability to monitor your data that is important to you. And Microsoft do that in a couple of ways. The information protection capabilities within M365, like Data Governance Suite for Office 365, and Azure's information protection gives you that level of integration that allows for classification and for labeling, which then allows the business to have that continuous protection of your data, irrespective of where your data lives or how your data effectively travels. So I think then we start realizing that we do need a proactive approach for governing sensitive data, right? To be able to sort of quickly respond when you need to comply with the regulator's request. What happens in that scenario?
Yes. Or
there's an internal requirement around data subject requests, DSRs, as part of POPIA. So, and we know that DSR is it's a topic of discussion around POPIA on its own.
Well, I mean, talking of DSR, I mean, let's just talk about that for a second. When you look at DSR and the processes you need to have in place, when you talk about POPIA, GDPR, for example, when a breach does happen, how do you deal with it? What are the processes? Because I mean, those are hurdles on its own. So let's touch on that for a moment. Now that we're talking POPIA and DSR, what happens when there is a breach?
Yeah, good question. So to help customers navigate the resources on the cloud services, Microsoft introduced a privacy tab into the actual portal itself. And there are three areas that this privacy tab effectively assists with. It gives you the information that you need to prepare your own assessments, your own data assessments, because each company's requirements are different to the next. Secondly, it gives you guidance on how to respond to a DSR, which is important. And thirdly, it gives you information around how Microsoft actually detects and response to data breaches, and how you actually get notifications from Microsoft. So feature-wise, in the actual apps, it's typically supported through a couple of features, but the main ones are, there's a very slick data privacy tab in Office 365, and I watched an interview, one of your interviews, where you had a Microsoft employee demo compliance manager, and you would have seen that tab in Excel or in Word or in PowerPoint, where you're able to click and effectively flag a document as confidential, and that effectively helps your compliance process. There's also a DSR portal in Azure, and you can log requests there. And then there, of course, DSR search capabilities. A big talking point, of course, is Dynamics 365, because we know that a lot of our customer information will exist and live within Dynamics going forward.
Gee, right. I mean, this is completely comprehensive. I mean, there are solutions for everything. You know, there's no reason to fear the POPIA issue. I mean, there is help out there. You can become compliant. There's help to become compliant. There's software to become compliant, as we've highlighted. How do people get in touch with you guys, and what are the next steps for organizations? I mean, and the big question is, if an organization's only just started the process to become compliant, is it too late?
Aki, I think importantly, you need to identify a partner if you haven't already appointed one. And I think what you'd be looking for in that company is someone who has the right experience and the right track record in this specific space to assist you through your journey. We've spoken a lot about this before, but effectively the technology partner would come in and identify the areas that you need focus on. And in fact, in some cases, it could just be building on your existing processes. And that again becomes sort of less cumbersome and less costly, of course. So something we need to keep in mind is that POPIA is a marathon race, and will most certainly will need continuous and ongoing focus and support. Yeah. You know, being compliant today does not mean you'll be compliant tomorrow, or whether you'll be compliant 6 months from now. It needs ongoing focus. So it is a very daunting topic on the agenda in boardroom meetings and in general meetings. But if you've got the right support from a partner, you'll be on the right path.
Yeah, but get on that path, because I tell you what, the implications if you do it wrong and you do have a data breach is, I don't even want to think about it. Absolutely. It frightens the living daylights out of me. Ryan Ramawoothar, thank you so much for joining us and sharing that insight with you. I imagine that you have a specialist division at First Technology that deals with this, as we've been talking right now, and there's plenty of resources on your website if people want to find out more about POPIA, how they start, what the journey that they take. I imagine that's all online, Ryan?
Absolutely. So we've got a few campaigns running around POPIA and all the technology websites and the news outlets like My Broadband and others. So you'll be able to get our details of those articles. We've got a survey that is currently running on My Broadband, which would be able to guide you and assist you. You'll also see, or you'll also be able to get us on our LinkedIn pages, on either the First Tech page or my personal page. And then we also have a YouTube channel where you'd be able to view all our campaigns and our content over there.
Fantastic. Ryan Ramawoothar, Senior Software and Cloud Specialist at First Technology. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Next. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Aki. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.